Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video. This is going to be my review for Star Wars Bad Batch Episode 1, which is called Aftermath. So, long episode, 70 minutes, so basically 3 normal episodes in one. I don't think this is going to be the case for every episode, but I thought it was a very good idea on May the 4th to launch it with a big sort of movie opening like this. And it worked because, in a way, the thing you had to do to really grasp people with this show, given that so many people were not really sold on the Bad Batch as characters, because let's be real here, that arc was probably the weakest part of the final season of the Clone Wars. I know you can maybe make the case that technically the Ahsoka setup arc of her returning probably was weaker just because it was maybe more disappointing, but it felt very random to also have the Bad Batch arc there. But now that is our introduction to the characters, so it meant that we were able to sort of jump in here with characters we for the most part already knew and just get onto the plots, what character arcs they're going for. And so it kind of solved that kind of problem. It kind of helped that you didn't have to overly reintroduce us to these characters when we already knew them. They were already pretty one note in that Wrecker wrecks things, Tech does tech stuff, Hunter is the leader, Crosshairs snipes things, and so on. Oh, and Echo is new to the team, but he's not up to much so far. So this was good. You had to do that, and what they did was they basically said, what about these guys, but what happens to them during Order 66? So an event that everyone cares about, kind of regardless of what characters you're dealing with during Order 66, what happens to them? I think everyone figured it out that, okay, realistically all or most of the team is unaffected by Order 66, and that turned out to be the case. Crosshairs is affected, but he's not completely affected. So that was kind of interesting to see him sort of be normal at times, because he's already relatively standoffish as a character, but to see him just like Hunter kind of come along with me, Crosshairs, but then they're trying to calm Caleb down, Kanan, and Crosshairs just shoots at him, and you're like, oh, I see what's going on here. Where this could just be Crosshairs jumping a little bit ahead, and they don't really figure out that it's necessarily Order 66 affecting him, because he's not straight up immediately right at the start of the episode ignoring what Hunter is saying, but he's very much beginning to get into the whole idea of what he says, a good soldier follows orders, which seems very the opposite of the Bad Batch approach. So that was a good way to start it off, so that this event opening worked, because otherwise what we thought they're doing afterwards is that we get the second episode on Friday, and then it's going to be every Friday up until the end of the season. I think we know there are going to be 16 episodes. I don't know how they're considering this first episode, if this is literally one giant episode or if it's like production 3 episodes. I'm not really sure. But either way, we're going to have like over 10, 12 episodes, or maybe up to 16. That seems pretty cool. Much longer than I expected. I thought this was only going to be sort of a short, sort of limited style series. But no, it looks like this potentially could be something bigger, like there might be another season. That seems kind of interesting to me. But I suppose you kind of saw what they were doing when it opened up and it transitioned from the Clone Wars logo into the Bad Batch logo, highlighting that this still is the continuation of the Clone Wars. Same animation quality, same models, that if you jump straight from the Bad Batch arc into this first episode of the Bad Batch, it's the same show basically. So that's kind of interesting. So I suppose with all that sort of kind of preamble out of the way, like, what is this show? What are they doing? Because there was a reasonable amount of hype for it, just because, this style of animation, this team, they do good work. But is the Bad Batch the plot, the characters that you want in a show of this quality? That was always the question, even from the trailers. And the trailers were a little bit kind of boring. It's why I never really did too much of a trailer analysis on it. I never felt like I needed to do a video, because it was just, here is the Bad Batch characters being the Bad Batch characters fighting. Oh, and here's some characters that you sort of know. That was basically what all the trailers had been. And so this was just, I think, much more like what we needed. How did they deal with Order 66? What is the plot that we're actually dealing with here? It turns out the plot that we're actually dealing with is, I think in terms of a big picture, it's the Empire transitioning away from the clones and beginning to think about using enlisted recruits. So we got that in this episode through Tarkin talking to the Prime Minister of Kamino and saying that we can protect the Empire for half the cost of producing clones with enlisted recruits. And while I suppose that hasn't happened yet, it definitely feels like the high-ups in the Empire are beginning to make this decision. That some of the clones are probably too much work to handle and that it's easier to just have a stormtrooper army. Now, I'm wondering, are we eventually, at some point in the Bad Batch, whether it's later on this season or maybe a season 2 of the Bad Batch, I don't know what the situation is with regards to that, we might eventually find a situation where the stormtroopers get established, there are still clone troopers around, and we maybe get that situation we know that is kind of canon that it happens from the Battlefront video game, which is stormtroopers fighting against clone troopers on Kamino, a bit of a uprising on the planet Kamino as sort of the last stand of the clones. I'd love to see something like that happen because it would be in a way, I think it would be the perfect finale for the Clone Wars show of Clone Wars transitioning into Bad Batch, which is a more clone-focused version of the Clone Wars, to end with sort of that full transition point of there's basically no clones really active anymore outside of the few that we know of. That feels kind of surprisingly fitting to just bring it all full circle and address in a big way that transition away from the clones into stormtroopers, which we don't really know, or it's not the most familiar story to a lot of Star Wars fans. So I kind of feel we're maybe heading a little bit in that direction. It depends on how we actually go about getting there. But big picture, I feel that's where we're going. In terms of the Bad Batch and what arc they seem to be going down, obviously from a character point of view, the characters of note here were mainly Hunter and Crosshairs. So Crosshairs because, of course, he was affected by Order 66. The rest of the team weren't. But Crosshairs wasn't fully affected by Order 66, but when they analysed the footage of the team's missions, they realised he's more loyal to the Empire than anyone else. His chip is sort of working. Let's amplify that to get him fully loyal on our side because he's really skilled. And so we end the episode with Crosshairs kind of leaves the team, is on the Empire side of things. The rest of the team leave, but with Omega, and they're down one member plus one new young member, and they're off to do what's going to happen in episode 2, which I'll discuss towards the end of the video. That was the interesting thing, because what they did here was they created a bit of a character arc for Crosshairs of, okay, he's being programmed and this is why he's acting that way, but he already was this sort of the guy who was very standoffish, didn't really talk much, and was maybe the rude member of the team to a degree. So that sort of masked the fact that he was acting a little bit out of character, and why they didn't notice it until basically the betrayal actually happened. I do wonder on a character level how this is going to work, in that are we going to see moments of doubt from him as we go on? Because we did get that interesting scene with Omega going up to talk to him and basically saying to him that I know what you're going to do and I hope you don't do it, but I also know it's not your fault, in that she seems to be aware that it is the programming, she maybe knows about the chip, and I think that sets up that she's probably going to be able to tell the rest of the Bad Batch the situation with the chip, and that there's a way to potentially save Crosshairs. He hasn't betrayed you, he doesn't want to do this, but you can get him back on your side. And I'm thinking that probably will be a major plot point. Will it be the mid-season finale or the actual finale? I'm not sure. But I can definitely see us trying to get Crosshairs back. Just because I think it would be nice to have a little bit of an arc of him back on the team, and maybe a little bit more vulnerable when you get him back, because what potentially did he do? Like, he nearly kills Wrecker in this episode. Because he is the sniper, it was very interesting, the dynamic at the end of the episode, just knowing that he is the most accurate member of the team. If they poke their head up, he's going to shoot it off. And like, if any of the members of the team were to switch sides, it probably was Crosshair who's the one you would least want to do that, just because he has the potential to sort of be the most lethal on the team. And Wrecker nearly got, as we saw. So that's an interesting one. Are they going to have them just like combat each other as we go on over the course of the missions, or is it going to be a much smaller arc? That's where I'm not really sure, because in the grand scheme of things, that's a nice arc, but it's nothing too crazy, because it really only involves like 2 characters. They really played Hunter off Crosshairs, just on the basis of Hunter is always the sort of, he's the commander, he's the most like some of the other clones, but he always makes his own choices. He's his own person. He doesn't like being commanded by other clones, and he'll always do his own thing. And even when Order 66 happens, he's still, the one questioning things the most, versus the character who questions things sort of the least. That dynamic is kind of there. And then the other 3 members of the team are just sort of there in all of this, which is a little bit unfortunate. Echo really only got a chance to shine by basically noting that, hey, Tarkin's here. I know Tarkin. I was on the Citadel mission. The Citadel mission was the mission where I got injured. So they just basically made a connection there. But we've 16 episodes. I'm assuming Echo will get his chance to shine in 1 or 2 of these episodes. Just as what it seems like they're going to do is that they're going to make this a little bit of a sort of traveling show, a little bit like The Mandalorian, of like the team now has to adapt to having Omega on the team. They're going to travel around a bit, go from place to place, meet different characters, and some of those characters are going to be characters that Echo knows, Echo has met over the course of the missions he's been on, but maybe the Bad Batch haven't, and he'll get to shine there. In that I think that's what they're heading to with the next episode. So at the very end of this episode, they said they're heading to Sector J19. Now, if you've watched the Clone Wars in a lot of detail, you'll remember that in Season 2, Episode 9, Grievous Intrigue, Eeth Koth was captured by General Grievous, and he, on the Hollow, basically, asking Obi-Wan Kenobi to come and fight him, basically. Eeth Koth was doing like hand signals, and he said like, this is where I am, and Obi-Wan says Seleucumai system, Sector J19. Then in the next episode, The Deserter, they go out to this sector, they crash land on the planet there, Seleucumai, and they find the Deserter clone Kut Lawquane, and he has a wife, he has kids, he has a family. It seems like Kut Lawquane will probably be in the next episode. We haven't seen him since that episode, I don't believe. So that could be fun. That would roughly make sense as like a character who Echo would know about through Rex primarily, and we'll see what way they go with it. Obviously, he's off on his own. He wouldn't have been communicated by Order 66, so it wouldn't have happened. There's no Jedi around, so nothing would have happened. It'll be interesting, when they mention it to him, if they do, if he has any sort of reaction to it, but it's just going to be like, okay, what are we going to do with Kut? We haven't seen him in so long. That seems kind of interesting to me as, a decent idea for the next episode. But I suppose we need to get on to Omega, who I think, based on the trailer where we first saw her and her presentation here, they're definitely getting across that she's kind of the key thing in terms of if something big is going to happen in this show, it's going to come from her and who she is, why she was created, and so on. They don't really confirm too much about her, but it seems like she is a female clone of Jango Fett, which is an interesting concept to bring up, like right at the end of the Clone Wars, that this theoretically is something they only tried or happened right at the end. And I say that because at the end she seems to pick up a blaster and adapt to it very quickly. And of course Jango Fett is the perfect template for the clones because he adapts to warfare so easily. So I'm guessing that's her showing her sort of her genes as being a Jango Fett clone, that she was able to pick up the blaster and be so accurate so easily with it. But they're also kind of teasing that she might be force sensitive. And I don't know how much they're leaning into this in terms of is it just that she's a little bit more sort of emotionally aware of what people are thinking and what they're going to do, or is she actually aware of what they're thinking through the Force? It's hard to properly tell, but it would probably add more to the plot if she was Force sensitive, because then you get into the idea of, oh, Force sensitive clones are actually a thing that can work, which would build up the whole idea of the Snoke project, Palpatine having clones in Episode 9. And even though that plot wasn't great, you still need to fit it together and build that up to where it happens. So that makes, I think, a little bit of sense in terms of like, oh, they have some success here, but they need Force sensitive blood, which would be where kind of Grogu comes in. And I think Grogu potentially has the option to maybe appear at some point in this series, because we know he was at the temple, he was kind of saved from there. Along the way to get to where he ends up at the start of the Mandalorian, he might have come across the Bad Batch at some point. They might have protected him at some point. The likes of we know we're going to encounter like Fennec, potentially Cut. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the other clones, like a Wolf or a Gregor, maybe we encounter, maybe even Rex at some point. It wouldn't surprise me if maybe Grogu made an appearance here, but we have to wait and see on that. But like I said, I think a lot of the big picture stuff with this show is ultimately going to come down to what are the big reveals with Omega. I'm guessing they'll train her so she can hold her own better, how to use a blaster, how to just be a better combatant on the battlefield. But the real question is just, okay, what are we going to do with her sort of episode to episode? Some reveals are probably going to come out about her, but, what exactly are we doing here? What's the team's plan? Like I said, I think getting Crosshairs back, if the information comes out, if she has enough information to give them hope, that'll be something that I think definitely happens. They'll try and get him back if possible, which will obviously mean another fight, another encounter between the Bad Batch and Crosshairs plus Tarkin, and maybe him getting back on their side. A big thing probably at this point is would they be willing to kill off any members of this team? This is where I'm not sure about the scope of this show in terms of, is it just this one season? Are they planning multiple seasons? Because I'm wondering, are they going to be able to execute this well? Like, if they need to kill off one of these characters to really hit home the stakes, is that going to be able to work, given that people are very questioning how strong of characters some of these guys are? I'd say especially Wrecker and Tech, I think, are probably the two that just, they're very, very one note, and they need something more. And I want to see where they kind of go from there. Otherwise, action scenes were good, but again, it's beginning to become a little bit of a kind of set pattern of their unique tactics are no longer unique because they tend to do the same thing every time. They've got the ultimate sniper, so they have him snipe. They have the guy who runs out in front and causes a lot of chaos. In Wrecker, he does that pretty much every time. Tech does some tech thing to give them an advantage, and Hunter has good instincts, and then Echo is just a solid soldier, plus he now has the sort of cyborg implants and could be sort of tech support as well. That's what they do. I'm wondering, will they switch things up now without Crosshair? Because, we got 3-4 action scenes here. I was getting a little tired of the same thing over and over again already, so I wonder how they'll make that unique as time goes on. But the final thing I suppose to talk about is, during the Order 66 sequence, we got to see Caleb Dume and his master Depa Billaba, otherwise known as, Kanan and his master. So from Star Wars Rebels. This was interesting because what they did here basically retcons the old Kanan comic, which initially gave us his Order 66 story. The Bad Batch are not in that comic, and they are here. So there's a clear contradiction just because these characters are just not in the comic. And I thought it was always meant to be the case where in the new canon they were always going to make the effort to try and keep everything in continuity with each other. And so this feels a little bit dismissive of the comics, and that This is exactly what they did with the old EU. I thought the whole point of the new canon was to not do stuff like this, but they going along with it. So that was unfortunate, and I think the problem is that it's a nice reference to have, like, the people who haven't read the comic just to see Kanan there and make the connection, Deepa Billaba, and see it happen. Cool. But the way they're using this scene in this show is just to be a character reference. I don't think Kanan's going to come back and have an arc within this show. Kanan's arc has been done. And the comic, its aim was to tell the emotional side of that story for Kanan, how he survived and how he went to go sort of undercover after that. And I feel just using it as a reference in this episode takes away the meat of what the comic was actually trying to do. And it retcons it to the point where it almost takes away the meaning the story was meant to have just for a reference. And I almost feel it would have been better to just have this be a separate Jedi and their master, and you could have had the same effect, because it's still showing the idea of, ultimately, Crosshairs wants to kill the Jedi, Hunter doesn't. Because I don't really think the Bad Batch is going to interact with Kanan again unless they change up some stuff. So is there more of a significance behind it being Kanan? Will we see him again? Or, was this just a reference for the sake of a reference? It'll be interesting to see as we go on if this scene ages well, or it just feels like you just completely messed up a comic for the sake of this. Disney will probably give the excuse of, blend the two together, take scenes from this one, add them to this one, even though overall the two stories don't blend together perfectly. And I felt, again, the new canon was meant to avoid stuff like that. Because isn't that the way Legends is treated at the moment, where Legends stuff is basically canon until contradicted, kind of. But this was new canon, so I don't get it. It's really all over the place. We did get to see Saw Gerrera as well. It was a pretty quick scene. It was basically just meant to get across that this is the thing that makes Tarkin suspect the Bad Batch, because they're sent out there to eliminate this cell, but they don't, and instead he talks to them. Hunter talks to them. Now, will we come back to this? Perhaps. I've never been the biggest Saw Gerrera fan, in that they reference him in a lot of things, but I don't think he's that strong of a character. I get he is connected ultimately to the rebellion and stuff like that, but I don't think the Clone Wars arc with him was that strong. His appearances in Rogue One I didn't think was particularly great, or he's just that character who's always there, roughly related to the rebellion, but I never connect to that much. So I'm kind of hoping we don't go all in on him. It was nice to see him for the reference, but I prefer other stuff to happen, I think. And I'm guessing that's just where we're going. The likes of Cutler Quane next episode. We'll go on from there, and we'll have the episode that involves Fennec, and we'll continue on, I guess. I think I'm still waiting in a way for okay, what's this show's big thing going to be? When is the big reveal going to come out that sort of explains why they're giving The Bad Batch a 16-episode animated series? But that's a lot of episodes. A lot of episodes. That's longer than some of the later seasons of the Clone Wars. Why is this specific era of storytelling so important to tell? And this is where I do think, will they tell this as the story of how the clones transition into stormtroopers? Are the Bad Batch going to be bigger players in the scheme of things than we ever thought? I'm guessing more towards the middle, getting towards the end of the season, we'll maybe get some big reveals with Omega, and in just what's happening politically, that will change things. But we'll have to wait and see, because I think everyone's sort of waiting for will the Bad Batch go to see Rex? Will they go to see, will Cody or someone like that be introduced? Will we get introduced to a Empire loyal clone who has a connection to some of our other characters? That sort of thing. I think Wolf would kind of be interesting to see, because I don't think we know at all how Wolf, who's Plo Koon's commander, ends up with his chip removed. So there's a few little things like that they can definitely resolve. So yeah, they're my thoughts on the first episode of Bad Batch. I'm not going to fully commit at this point to reviewing every episode week by week. This one was fine because it was a full 70-minute thing. But, if we get the episode on Friday and I feel I don't have a lot to say about it, I might just hold it off and just do a review for every 2-3 episodes. We'll see how it goes, how many videos I have each week to do. But, I'm interested in The Bad Batch. It's not just a forgettable show, so, we'll see how it goes. So let me know your thoughts on this episode in the comments, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.